all the way.
Morning, everybody. Chester ARP Church Devotional Podcast. Clint Davis, your host. As we get started, we're going to read Genesis 14 this morning, the story of how Lot gets captured and Abram has to go rescue him. But before that, Mitch brings us in.
Feeds me with the living bread.
All right. Well, thank you so much as we get started this morning. Genesis 14. You'll forgive me if I don't read all of Genesis chapter 14. The reason is I can't say the names of the kings. I have tried multiple times to record this. I just can't get them all out, and I can't say it correctly. Basically, there's a bunch of kings who have waged war against a bunch of other kings. There's 4 kings who have waged war against 4 or 5 other kings. They're all met in a valley out by the Dead Sea. And they come out together, and they go to war against one another. And the 4 kings that were kind of oppressive and the kings that wanted to attack the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah and the kings of other areas in this particular valley, they are victorious. And in the Sedum Valley, which is the valley of the Dead Sea, contained many asphalt pits, and the kings of Sodom and the kings of Gomorrah fled, and some fell into them, and the rest fled into the mountains. And so the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah, which is where Lot has chosen to make his home, have fled off into the wilderness because they've been defeated by these kings that have come to battle against them. These 4 kings who've come to battle against them. Verse 11 says, the 4 kings took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their food and went on. They also took Abram's nephew Lot and his people and his possessions, for he was living in Sodom, and they went on. And so these kings came out, and the reason this is significant to us is because when they came out, they went to war against Sodom and Gomorrah and several other cities in the area. These 4 kings were victorious. They took away all the possessions, all the people, and everybody fled from before them because they were afraid. And a part of that group that was taken in captivity and the possessions was Lot, Abram's nephew. Now remember, they separated yesterday in Genesis 13, and Lot took what he thought to be the choicest portion. Now he got himself into some mess, and so he's there in right side of Sodom, and he gets captured in this battle. And so now we pick this story up here in verse 13 of Genesis chapter 14. One of the survivors came and told Abram the Hebrew, who lived near the oaks belonging to Mamre the Amorite, the brother of Eshcol and the brother of Aner. And they were bound with it by a treaty with Abram. When Abram heard that his relative had been taken prisoner, he assembled his 318 trained men born in his household, and they went in pursuit as far as Dan. And he and his servants deployed against them by night, defeated them, and pursued them as far as Hobath to the north of Damascus. He brought back all the goods, and also his relative Lot and his goods, as well as the women and the other people. All right, so Abram finds out that Lot's been taken captive and all his possessions. Well, that doesn't sit well with Abram. And so Abram gets his 318 men, right? That's what we're told specifically, 318 men against the army, 318 men who are well-trained, who are born in his household. So Abram has not only his family, but he has all of the herdsmen and all the servants, and those people were born as well, and they lived in the household of Abraham, and so they had to serve along with Abram. And so Abram takes his army, as it were, and goes and fights against these kings. Now, these kings have just destroyed 4 cities and their armies. But Abram goes, obviously going under the blessing of the Lord, obviously going under the provision of the Lord, obviously going under the protection of the Lord. Abram goes, and when Abram goes, he goes to war with these kings, and he gets Lot and all of Lot's possessions back. The Lord gives victory to Abram, and he brings all the possessions back. Abram basically was a guy you didn't want to mess with, right? So I think when I read about Abraham, I don't always think about Abram being a true man's man, a man who's going to go after and say, you don't want to mess with this guy. He's a bad dude. Kind of like David, right? You think of David singing psalms and playing harps and keeping the flock of his father out in the wilderness, right? And then he becomes the great king. And so that, but when you read about David and his fighting and his mighty men, and then you read things like David killed his 10,000, Saul's killed his thousands, and you don't think about David, but when you really stop and think about how brutal David could have been, you kind of take notice. The same is true with Abram. Abram says, all right, let's go get Lot. Abram has a definitive connection to his nephew, but he also has to protect his nephew, and he protects what is rightfully his, what has been given unto him. The Lord calls us to do that. This is part of his servant nature. This is part of his servant heart. It's also part of his understanding of his connectivity and his call to be a protector of that which God has given him. And so Abram goes out and serves and goes and fights off the enemy and brings Lot back. And so I think when it comes to us, we have to protect what God's given us. We have to fight in some cases to protect what God has given us, and we need to go out and make sure that we are those going in the will of the Lord, but bringing back that which is ours because the Lord has given it to us, and protecting it and holding it fast. Maybe that's a lesson. Maybe you need to be called to protect something that's yours. Maybe you need to be called to fight to keep something that's yours, or someone in particular that's yours. It's less about possessions. It's more about Lot. Who are we called to fight for, and who are we called to protect, and who are we called to bring back? In our society, maybe that's the unborn. Maybe that's somebody in your family. Maybe that's something at your church. Maybe that's some connection to one of your own children, etc. And so you have to think through that. God's called us to serve him in that way, and that's part of how we serve other people, by protecting and caring for and being willing to put ourselves perhaps in harm's way in order to advance those people whom we are called to protect. You guys have a great day. God bless you. I'll see you tomorrow.
You care.